Sirens tore through the grey morning, mingling with the echo of hurried footsteps and desperate voices that pierced the school hallways. Teachers ran disoriented, trying to calm crying children, but the exchanged glances revealed more fear than control. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as if something pent up for too long had finally surfaced. Police officers burst into rooms, shouting rapid orders and searching every corner, until one of them stopped in front of an old cabinet in the music room. The metallic sound of iron being broken into exploded like thunder. When the wood gave way with a sharp crack, silence fell instantly. Everyone backed away, as if afraid to look inside. Eyes widened, mouths dropped in shock. What was revealed here wasn't just disturbing, it was a stifled truth now exposed beyond repair. Within hours, the entire city would know the details, and nothing would be the same again. It was then that a voice, almost like a collective whisper, seemed to hover over everyone. None of this would have happened if it weren't for a boy named Noah Brown. The scene dissolves. The chaos, the sirens, the tears disappear. The narrative rewinds to an earlier time. Long before the commotion, long before the entire city held its breath. Just an ordinary morning, marked by the noise of children in the hallways and musical notes escaping from the music room. But there, hidden among the chords, was a secret, a mystery that only a boy in his apparent insignificance would be able to perceive. And this is where the story really begins. Who was Noah Brown, and why was he the only one who saw what no one else dared to see? And if you also want to discover the secrets Noah kept, take the opportunity to subscribe and leave a like, because what comes next is even more surprising. Noah Brown was only 11 years old, but he had a rare depth in his eyes, as if every detail that escaped the notice of others was precisely registered in his mind. He lived with his mother, Angela, in a small two-bedroom apartment in Newark, New Jersey. Angela was a nurse, working long, exhausting shifts, and did her best to keep the house in order and provide her son with a decent life, even though her absence was often felt in the echoing silences within the house. Noah spent hours alone, immersed in sketchbooks, observing the world through the narrow living room window and creating stories from what he saw. His father's absence was a burden he couldn't put into words. He had disappeared when Noah was still young, leaving only vague memories and a feeling of emptiness that grew with the years. It wasn't uncommon for the boy to be silent for long periods, as if trapped in thoughts no one else could reach. At school, his classmates saw him as strange, always quiet, always distant, and so he was rarely included in games or conversations. Nobody takes Noah seriously, some teachers would say, failing to realize that it was precisely within his apparent introspection that lurked an extraordinary ability to observe the invisible. Despite his isolation, there was a tenderness in the way he treated those around him. When his mother arrived late at night, exhausted from hours in the hospital, Noah would wait for her with a glass of water ready and a shy smile, as if that simple gesture were his silent way of caring for her. His attentive gaze also turned to the school. He noticed every detail in the hallways, the almost imperceptible changes in routine, the sounds others ignored. It was as if his senses were always on alert, alert to what lurked beneath the surface. Still, the world seemed determined to cast him aside. His peers' dismissive words wounded him, but they didn't break him. There was a silent resilience within Noah, a kind of flame that refused to be extinguished even in the face of neglect and loneliness. This flame manifested itself in the way he paid attention to what no one else wanted to notice. If a door creaked unusually, he noticed. If a strange sound emerged amid the piano's noise, he registered it. If something was out of place, he was the first to notice. However, until that moment, no one saw any value in it. To the adults, it was just childish imagination. To his classmates, it was an unimportant oddity. What no one imagined was that this sensitivity, so often ignored, would be precisely what would change the fate not only of Noah, but of the entire school. And as he walked the halls on another ordinary morning, carrying his worn backpack and notebooks full of drawings, he had no idea he was about to perceive the first sign of a mystery everyone else chose to ignore. What Noah felt in that music room seemed insignificant at first, but it would become the key to a secret the entire school had tried to hide. That morning, the music room seemed the same as every other time Noah had entered. The smell of polished wood, the shine of the floor worn from generations of students, and the imposing piano in the corner were all part of a scene he was already familiar with. Professor Collins was tuning the instruments, while some students beat out off-kilter rhythms on drums or tested high notes on out-of-tune flutes. But for Noah, something wasn't right from the moment he walked through the door. A strange odor permeated the air, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but persistent enough to be disturbing. It wasn't the usual dusty or musty smell you'd expect from an old room. It was something more metallic, as if burnt iron were mixed with the air, an aroma that immediately aroused discomfort. While everyone laughed and were distracted by the sounds of the class, Noah remained still, breathing more carefully. He could sense that the odor was coming from a specific point in the room, something the others completely ignored. And it was at that moment that he noticed another detail that made his skin crawl. Behind the notes played on the piano, there was a muffled, almost imperceptible sound, as if someone, somewhere, was trying to communicate through the walls. It was a lament hidden amidst the cheerful melody, a faint beat that accompanied each chord like a scream swallowed by time. The boy turned his head discreetly, his eyes falling on the old wooden cabinet leaning against the back of the room. The smell seemed to emanate from there, as if every crack were a fissure through which something that shouldn't have been trapped was escaping. He watched intently, trying to see if anyone else noticed, but his classmates merely enjoyed themselves, clapping out of rhythm, completely oblivious. When the teacher passed by, he attempted to comment, but his voice failed. The fear of being ridiculed once more silenced him, and he simply sat back down, though his mind remained on high alert. In that instant, Noah understood that there was something hidden beneath the surface of that room, something everyone else preferred to ignore. The music, which should have been an expression of joy and learning, hid behind its notes a disturbing message that only he seemed able to hear. And even though he tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, every muffled beat on the piano, every strange breath coming from the closet, pushed him further toward the certainty that he was facing something greater than he could comprehend. And it was precisely this strange combination of smell and sound that would lead him, a few hours later, to discover something in the closet that would change his life forever. When the bell rang, Noah's classmates hurried out, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. The teacher gathered up some sheet music and left carrying his bag, unaware that he had remained seated, silent, staring at the antique cabinet. Silence fell over the room, and the boy seized the moment to slowly stand up, as if each step were a plunge into something forbidden. His heart raced with the same intensity as someone who senses they're about to touch something that could change everything. He approached the closet and smelled the strongest scent, so thick it seemed to stick in his throat. He ran his hand over the surface of the wood and noticed it vibrating slightly, almost as if it had a pulse of its own. He hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before pressing his ear against the door. What he heard made his body freeze. There was a muffled, irregular sound, reminiscent of faint knocking, as if someone at some point had tried to be heard from inside. With trembling hands, Noah pulled on the rusty handle, but the cabinet wouldn't open. He tried again, to no avail, Then, on impulse, he knelt and shone the dim light escaping from the window at the bottom. There, he found something even more disturbing: marks etched into the wood, deep scratches that formed crooked lines, as if desperate nails had tried to leave a message. Looking closely, he noticed repeating symbols, almost like initials. He ran his fingers over the marks and felt a shiver run down his spine. The boy's mind filled with questions. Who had left it? Why in that particular place? And most importantly, why didn't anyone else seem to notice? The weight of the discovery suffocated him, but at the same time, it awakened an uncontrollable curiosity. It was as if each scratch was a voice crying out to be heard, a forgotten story begging to be revealed. Noah took a few steps back, still staring at the locker as if faced with a puzzle only he could solve. For a moment, he considered running to the principal and telling them what he'd seen, but a doubt nagged at him. What if, once again, no one believed him? It was precisely this uncertainty that pushed him to the next step, telling the truth and facing once again the disbelief of everyone around him. That same afternoon, Noah arrived home with a heavy heart. The closet was on his mind, and the scratch marks were etched into his memory like scars on his own skin. He decided to tell his mother first, hoping that Angela, with her nurse's sensitivity, would understand the gravity of what he had witnessed. As she prepared coffee after a long shift at the hospital, he described the smell, the vibrations, the engraved symbols. Angela listened patiently, but her weary expression betrayed that she interpreted it as childish imagination. She stroked his hair and said softly, "You have a creative mind, Noah. Maybe you're just tired. Don't worry. Tomorrow everything will seem simpler." But nothing seemed simple to him. The next day, he summoned courage and went to the school principal's office. Sitting before Principal Williams, he tried to explain every detail, his voice trembling but firm, filled with conviction. The man, however, couldn't hide his smile of disbelief. "Noah, you've been watching too many horror movies, haven't you? There's nothing inside that closet but dust. Go back to class and stop making up stories." The feeling of invisibility was like a blow. Once again, his words carried no weight, as if he were condemned to live in a world where his voice would never find an echo. Determined not to give up, he even sought out a local police officer patrolling near the school. He summoned the courage to report his discovery, but the response was laced with irony. "Kid, you should be worrying about your homework, not ghosts in old closets." Noah stood motionless, swallowing his frustration, as the opportunity to be taken seriously slipped through his fingers. At school, things got even worse. Some classmates overheard his conversation with the principal and mocked his story. At recess, they'd shout, "Hey, ghost hunter, did you find any monsters in the closet?" Laughter echoed through the courtyard, each like an arrow piercing Noah's heart. He turned away, trying to hide his tears, but the pain was unbearable. What he'd seen was real. He'd felt it firsthand, but the world seemed determined to convince him it was all fantasy. Still, something inside him wouldn't let him give up. The flame that had always kept him attentive to details now burned brighter, fueled by the feeling of injustice. The silence of adults, the contempt of his peers, the weight of not being heard, all of it fueled an inevitable decision. If no one believed him, then he would have to find the truth himself. And it was precisely this silent decision, born of rejection and pain, that began the secret investigation that would change everyone's destiny. The next night, as the city settled down for sleep, Noah lay awake in his bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling of his small room. The contemptuous words echoed in his mind, every laugh from his classmates, and every indifferent response from the adults like an open wound that never stopped hurting. But behind the pain was something even stronger, a quiet determination. He knew he wasn't imagining it. The smell, the marks, the vibrations, all of it was real. And if no one was willing to believe it, then it was up to him to prove it. He waited for his mother to fall asleep, made sure the building was quiet, and carefully pocketed the small flashlight he used for drawing during occasional blackouts. He also grabbed his cell phone, not very modern, but adequate for recording audio and video. He put an old pocket knife, inherited from his grandfather, in his backpack, not as a weapon, but as a makeshift tool in case he needed to open something. Before leaving, he glanced at his sleeping mother and felt a pang of guilt, but quickly convinced himself he was doing the right thing. The school was only a few blocks from his home. Noah walked through the empty streets, lit only by flickering streetlights, as if even the light itself hesitated before what he was about to face. Each step seemed too loud in the silence of the night, and the feeling of being watched stayed with him at every turn. When he finally reached the school gates, he took a deep breath and jumped over a rusty side fence where the railing was loose, something he was familiar with from his daily observations. Inside, the building seemed even more sinister. The hallways, so full of voices during the day, were now tunnels of shadows. The sound of his own footsteps echoed off the walls, and the air carried an almost unearthly chill. Noah walked slowly, alert to every sound, as if someone might appear at any moment. By the time he reached the music room door, his breathing was heavy, and his hands were shaking. Carefully, he turned the doorknob and entered. Darkness filled the room, broken only by the dim beam of his flashlight. The closet stood there, motionless, but it seemed larger, more menacing in the gloom. He approached with measured steps, and the metallic smell invaded his nostrils again, even more intense than during the day. This time, there was no doubt. It wasn't dust, it wasn't mold. It was something alive, imbued with despair. Resolute, Noah turned on his cell phone camera and started recording. He shone the flashlight into the cracks and realized that the hole behind the cabinet, which he had only noticed briefly before, was deeper than he had imagined. He stuck his pocket knife between the wood and tried to widen the opening. The sound of creaking wood echoed through the room, and he paused for a moment, alarmed at the possibility of being heard. Silence. He took a deep breath and continued. With each movement, more splinters fell to the floor, revealing a dark, narrow space behind the cabinet. He reached through the crack and felt something wet, cold, almost slimy. He quickly withdrew it, wiping it on his pants, his heart racing. He brought the light closer again, and this time noticed dark stains on the inner wall. They were marks that resembled dried blood, spread in irregular patterns. Noah swallowed hard, his phone trembling in his hands, but he kept recording, knowing these images would be proof he wasn't making this up. Then he heard it, a low, distant sound coming from somewhere beyond the closet. It wasn't the piano this time, but a muffled noise like a sigh or a breath. Noah froze, holding his breath, trying to tell if it was just his imagination. But the sound came again, louder, as if something or someone was trapped there waiting to be found. His instincts screamed to run, but something inside him told him he couldn't stop now. The mystery was unfolding before his eyes, and retreating would mean returning to being the invisible boy no one could hear. With courage he didn't even know he possessed, Noah pressed his ear to the opening and, for the first time, knew for sure there was someone or something behind that cabinet. And it would be this terrifying discovery that would lead him to put together the pieces of a dark puzzle, hidden for decades within the school itself. The next morning, Noah could barely concentrate during class. What he had recorded the night before haunted him like a shadow. The dark stains, the scratched marks, and, above all, the muffled human-sounding sound, While his classmates laughed and joked during recess, he isolated himself in a corner with his phone in hand, revisiting the video over and over, trying to understand every detail. The flickering light of the flashlight revealed only fragments, but for him, it was enough. That cabinet hid something far beyond dust and ancient wood. Driven by an urgency to understand, he decided to use the library computer. Pretending to be researching a history paper, he typed in keywords that might connect the mystery to the school's past. Newark School music disappearance was his first attempt. For a few minutes, nothing relevant appeared. But then, an old article caught his eye. Dated almost 20 years ago, it talked about the disappearance of a student named James Miller, last seen in the music room of the same school where Noah was now studying. The article was short, with little information, but it described James as 11 years old, the same age as Noah at the time of his disappearance. The case had never been solved, and the newspaper classified it as a mystery without answers. Noah felt a chill run down his spine. The initials JM, which he had seen carved into the wood of the cabinet, now made perfect sense. They were not meaningless scribbles, but a desperate plea from someone who wanted to be remembered. As he read, he realized the story had been virtually forgotten by the town. No memorial, no remembrance, just a few lines. In a yellowed newspaper, it was as if everyone had decided to bury the case along with time, erasing James Miller's existence. But for Noah, this wasn't just history. It was confirmation that what he'd felt the night before had deep, painful roots. With his heart racing, he printed the item and tucked it into his backpack. For the rest of the day, he closely observed everyone around him, especially the janitor, Mr. Harris, who always seemed to appear at the wrong moments, with a look that never conveyed confidence. Noah noticed that Harris avoided the music room, detouring whenever possible. This behavior, previously unnoticed, now took on a suspicious weight. That afternoon, Noah returned to investigate. Carefully, he compared the marks he had photographed with the initials printed in the newspaper. The jagged lines did indeed form the letters J and M. There was no denying it. He was faced with a direct connection between the present and a dark past. For the first time, he felt he was not just confronting a strangeness, but unearthing a forgotten crime. Still, the discovery brought no relief. On the contrary, it heightened his fear. If James had disappeared there, who could guarantee it wouldn't happen again? And, worse still, who could guarantee there wouldn't be someone willing to silence any attempt to uncover the truth? The weight of that thought made Noah shudder, but it also strengthened his resolve. As he walked the hallways at the end of the day, he felt that every look, every closed door, every distant noise carried a hidden meaning. Everything seemed to conspire to keep him from that secret, but he was already in too deep to retreat. The muffled sound he'd heard behind the locker echoed in his mind like a call, and the image of James Miller became clearer and clearer, almost as if pleading for help across time. In that moment, Noah understood that his search was no longer just for answers, but for justice. He couldn't allow James's fate to remain forgotten. The puzzle began to come together before his eyes, and each piece confirmed that he was on the right path. But at the same time, the closer he got to the truth, the more he felt the shadow of danger growing around him. And this danger would soon reveal itself, because someone had already noticed his persistent curiosity and was willing to stop him from continuing. The days that followed grew increasingly burdensome for Noah. With each step he took toward the truth, the feeling of being watched grew like a silent shadow. Janitor Harris seemed to always be nearby, discreetly monitoring his movements, as if he sensed the boy had uncovered more than he should have. Noah tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but his eyes betrayed the tension, and his heart raced whenever he passed that man with the rigid expression and cold gaze. On a rainy afternoon, while most of the students ran for cover from the torrential rain, Noah decided to seize the moment and return to the music room alone. The hallway was empty, lit only by the flashing lights that flickered with every clap of thunder. The boy opened the door slowly, his breath catching in his throat, and approached the locker again. The metallic smell was still there, more intense than ever, as if the rain had awakened something dormant. He turned on his phone and started recording again, determined to gather evidence that could convince even the most skeptical. But he wasn't alone. As he focused on the cracks in the closet, a shadow loomed behind him. Noah sensed the presence even before he heard the footsteps. He turned quickly and found himself face to face with Mr. Harris. The man held a set of keys in one hand, his face set in a stern, almost menacing expression. "What are you doing here, boy?" The deep voice echoed through the empty space, carrying a coldness that sent a chill down Noah's spine. The boy tried to make up an excuse, but the words stuck. Harris took a few steps forward, closing the classroom door behind him, and the tension turned to real fear. Noah backed away, pressing himself against the locker, his cell phone trembling in his hands. "You shouldn't touch things you don't understand," the caretaker said, moving even closer. "That curiosity will get you into serious trouble." Noah swallowed, unsure how to react. Harris's tone wasn't that of a mere staff member concerned about a student, but of someone carrying dangerous secrets. Noah's heart was beating so fast he feared the man might hear it. When Harris tried to grab his phone, Noah reacted instinctively. He pushed the janitor's arm away and ran to the door, but it was locked. Harris caught up with him and grabbed his backpack tightly, pulling him back. In his desperation, the boy managed to free himself, knocking some sheet music to the floor, and ran toward the windows. The rain was beating down outside, and the wind was rattling the glass, but it was the only way out he could see. The sound of the chase echoed through the hallways. Noah ran as fast as he could, dodging scattered chairs and tables, while Harris followed with heavy steps and heavy breathing. The boy turned a corner and found the emergency stairs. He ran down them, the sound of his wet sneakers mixing with the thunder outside. Fear consumed him, but adrenaline gave him strength. Upon reaching the ground floor, Noah hid behind a broom closet, trying to control his breathing. Harris hurried past, looking for him, but didn't see him. The boy seized the opportunity and escaped through a side door, feeling the cold rain soak his clothes. The feeling of freedom was short-lived, because he knew this confrontation was only the beginning. The janitor had made it clear there was something that needed to be hidden at all costs, and now Noah was certain he was in danger. He ran home without looking back, his heart pounding, his phone still recording in his hand. When he finally collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and wet, he realized the camera had captured not only his escape, but also Harris's threatening voice. That evidence could change everything, but it also made him a target. And it was from that moment that Noah understood that he was not just facing a mystery, but at the center of a dangerous conspiracy that would soon come to an explosive conclusion. The day of the school performance arrived, and the music room was packed. Parents, teachers, and students gathered to watch the performances prepared over weeks. The piano was polished, the scores carefully aligned, and Ms. Collins was arranging the final details, little imagining that this morning would become a landmark in the school's history. Noah, sitting among his classmates, couldn't concentrate. His hands were sweating, his heart was racing, and the weight of the secret he carried seemed greater by the minute. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. The recording on his cell phone, the marks on the locker, the metallic smell, and, above all, Mr. Harris's threat were proof enough that something terrible lurked there. The silence imposed by the adult's disbelief had lasted too long. If he wasn't heard now, he might never have a chance again. When the first performance ended and applause filled the room, Noah suddenly stood up, drawing everyone's attention. The teacher's gaze narrowed in surprise, but before she could reprimand him, he spoke in a firm voice, though choked with emotion. "Everyone needs to listen. There's something in that closet." A murmur of confusion filled the audience. Nervous laughter erupted among some of his classmates, but Noah didn't back down. He pointed directly at the piece of furniture, his voice echoing throughout the room. "I saw marks. I heard sounds. There's a secret hidden in there, and you have to believe me." Director Williams stood up, visibly embarrassed, trying to stop the scene. "Noah, go back to your seat. This is no time for this kind of behavior." But the boy didn't relent. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and played the recording. The muffled voices, the smell described in his nervous speech, and finally, the janitor's recorded threat echoed through the speakers as he connected the device to the room's sound system. The room, previously filled with disbelief, fell into absolute silence. Every eye turned to Harris, who, leaning against the back of the room, looked paler than ever. It was at that moment that one of the police officers present to ensure the event's security approached. The murmur turned into commotion. Teachers and parents demanded that the locker be opened. Harris tried to protest, but his voice faltered. The officer didn't wait for orders. With one sure blow, he broke the rusty lock. The crack echoed like a gunshot, and when the door opened, the metallic smell escaped, spreading throughout the room. Inside, everyone could see the deep marks, the scratched symbols, the dark stains on the interior wall. The initials JM were there, clear, stark. Shock gripped the audience. Mothers wept, teachers covered their mouths in horror, and students stared in astonishment, disbelieving what they saw. Noah felt his legs tremble. He wasn't the only one carrying the burden now. The entire city had been confronted with the truth. But that public revelation was only the beginning, for what the police would uncover next would reveal an even greater terror, hidden deep within the school itself. The music room, once filled with innocent sounds, had become the scene of an investigation. The broken open cabinet revealed disturbing marks, but also hints of something much darker. The officer who had opened the lock radioed for backup, his firm voice betraying the gravity of the discovery. Parents hugged their children in panic. Teachers exchanged incredulous looks. Of all the suspects, Noah seemed the most shocked, staring into the darkness beyond the broken wood. The school was quickly evacuated. Only authorities remained. In the building, cordoning off the hallway with yellow tape, investigators examined every detail until they realized the bottom of the closet wasn't solid. After removing the loose boards, an opening revealed itself. The air that escaped was suffocating, permeated with rust and moisture. Noah, protected by a police officer, couldn't look away. As officers entered the narrow tunnel, the sound of footsteps mingled with the dripping of water on the walls. What they found made their blood run cold. An underground room with rusty bars, torn mattresses, and abandoned children's objects. Toys, notebooks, and shoes revealed that children had been kept there. James Miller's case was just part of a much larger horror. The news spread through the city like wildfire. Police cars, ambulances, and helicopters surrounded the school, while reporters scrambled to capture every detail. In his testimony, Noah handed over his cell phone recordings and described everything he had discovered. For the first time, he was listened to attentively and treated as a key player in the case. When Harris was arrested, he avoided looking at the boy, but his eyes revealed anger and fear. Noah, shaken, understood that justice was beginning to be served. Still, he knew that no operation would restore the lost peace, only the certainty that the truth was no longer buried. The next morning brought with it a strange calm, as if the entire town was still trying to comprehend the weight of the revelation. The school was surrounded by reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Yellow tape blocked access, and police officers stood guard. At the center of all the commotion was Noah Brown, a boy of just 11 who had suddenly become the voice that echoed through everyone. At City Hall, a press conference was held. Local officials, parents, and teachers filled the main hall. The police chief took the floor and, in a firm voice, declared, "If it weren't for this boy's courage, we might still be blind to the truth." Then he called Noah to the stage. The boy walked slowly, huddled in his loose jacket, his eyes downcast, feeling the weight of all the eyes on him. There was no pride in his steps, only the strange feeling that he was there because he had done what anyone should have done, paid attention. When he took the stage, he was greeted by a round of applause that echoed through the hall. Teachers who had previously laughed at his words now gave him a standing ovation. Classmates who had mocked him watched him silently, some with tears in their eyes, others visibly remorseful. Angela, his mother, wept quietly in the audience, proud but also moved by the realization of how much her son had carried alone. A microphone was placed before him, but Noah hesitated. He had no prepared speech, no rehearsed lines. He took a deep breath and said simply what he felt. "I didn't want to be a hero. I just wish someone had listened to me before." The room fell silent, and those simple words rang, louder than any official pronouncement. Afterward, as he hugged his mother, he heard apologies from teachers, principals, and even classmates. It was a moment of healing, of belated recognition. But deep inside, Noah knew there was still something unresolved. The weight of what he had encountered, the muffled voices he had heard, and the mysterious sound that had never left his memory were reminders that perhaps this story wasn't over. And indeed, upon returning home that night, Noah would discover that some truths do not end even after justice, but continue to echo in silences that no one dares to explain. That night, after the public recognition and the emotional hugs, Noah returned home exhausted. The city lights flickered outside, reflecting in the windows of the small apartment, and Angela watched him silently, realizing that, despite the victory, something still weighed heavily on his eyes. He sat by the window, resting his chin on his knees, and let the silence fill the room. It was a different silence, not the emptiness of indifference, but the weight of someone who had seen firsthand secrets no one should ever carry. As he stared at the rain-soaked street, he felt his heart pounding restlessly. The muffled voices, the scratched cymbals, and the memories of the underground still swirled in his mind. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, trying to convince himself that it was all over, that justice had been served. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. Some stories don't end when newspapers publish headlines or when criminals are led away in handcuffs. They live on in the shadows, waiting to resurface. Suddenly, a soft sound cut through the silence. It wasn't the television, nor the radio, nor the wind rustling through the cracks in the window. It was music, a piano, distant, playing the same notes he'd heard days ago in the music room. Noah's eyes widened and his breath caught. That room was sealed, guarded by police, and yet the melody rang. Clear, like a call coming from somewhere untraceable. A shiver ran down his spine, reminding him that the mystery might be greater than anyone imagined. He stood there, motionless, letting himself be enveloped by the strange melody echoing in the night. With each note, the feeling that something had yet to be revealed grew within him. The boy everyone had ignored, the same one who bore the marks of loneliness and disbelief, now understood that his journey was just beginning. The imaginary camera of the story would slowly pull away, showing Noah sitting before the window while the music persisted, soft but disturbing, leaving the question hanging in the air. Was it just his memory tormenting him, or were there hidden forces still demanding to be heard? If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the next exciting stories. Turn on notifications and share this video because the truth can often be hidden where no one dares to look.